This meeting is
Hey
being
everybody,
recorded.
I'm Cherie Silas, and today we're going to be talking about clearing the confusion around relative sizing. So as we get started, first, the learning outcomes from this session are going to be understanding relative sizing, understanding the mental steps that are involved in being able to relatively size your work, and then a game called Planning Poker, which makes it fun and easy for a team to work together to agree on the size of a story. So first, why relative sizing? Well, because we stink at actually estimating time. So every time we try to guess time, it's just that, a guess. But reality is, we don't really know how long things take. We can guess at how long things take if everything goes all well and exactly like we plan and there are no hiccups. The problem is that nothing ever goes that way. There is always unplanned variance. So for us to size work by how many hours it takes to do that work and then try to plan our sprints based on hours, we're likely to overplan because we lose time every time we answer the phone, every time we've got to think about how to fix something and we find a different piece of work or a million other unplanned things that come in and bring variance to the time schedule. So since we don't do hourly estimating very well, what we are good at is looking at things, one compared to another, and relative to each other, we can tell how large things are. So, for example, you might look at these Starbucks cups and say, well, that's a extra small, small, medium, large. Or you might say that's a small, medium, large, extra large cup. And I know if you're a Starbucks fan, you call them tall, grande, venti, and trenti. But for those who don't drink Starbucks, let's just go with small, medium, large, and extra large. So I can look at things one next to the other. And while I might not be able to tell you exactly how many ounces is in each cup, I can tell you that the one on the right, the really tall one, has a lot more than the one on the left. So relative to one another, they're the furthest apart. We take that way of thinking into the way we look at our work in order to be able to understand how much work we can actually do in one sprint. So by understanding how large something is and then taking the average of that work over time, then we know how many story points or how much work we can actually get done on average in a sprint. And this saves us time in doing a bunch of complex calculations regarding who's on vacation and how many hours we work in support and a bunch of other things. So the thought process behind relative sizing. Well, there's a few steps. The first step is first, effort does not equal hours. So understanding that the amount of work to be done is effort. How long it takes you to do it is hours. But depending on how you do the work, it may have a different number of hours, but the effort is still the same. So, for example, if I'm going to go from Seattle, Washington to Pensacola, Florida, that is however many thousand miles. And I know some of you are looking that up right now. So that's the amount of effort involved. It's going from one place to the other. This is the distance that we have to travel. Now, depending on how I get there, is going to determine how many hours it's going to take. So if I go by plane, it'll take a few hours, maybe 6. If I go by vehicle, car, or a truck, it's going to take maybe a couple of days. If I take a bicycle, it may take a couple of weeks or maybe even months. And if I walk, it would take me about 10 years because I would never make it. So remembering that the amount of work that needs to be done is not the same as how many hours it takes to do it. This is going to help you because you have multiple people on your team who will be doing work, and one may do it faster than the other. We want to size work based on the work that's there, not how long it takes an individual to do the work. So when we look at sizing work, we look at three aspects: effort, risk, and complexity. And we put those things together and we get a feel for just how big it is. Like if I can put my arms around it, or if I try to put my arms around it and I can't quite get around the back, I know that one that I can touch my fingers is about that big. And I know one that I can't quite reach around is, about that big. So for example, if I look at these three stories, they're different in complexity, effort, and risk. So the one on the left, story number one, has a decent amount of effort, a decent amount of complexity, but not too much risk. The one all the way on the right has a decent amount of risk, but not too much complexity and a decent amount of effort. So while the risk is higher on the one on the right than the one on the left, story number three and story number one, the complexity of number one is larger than complexity number three, and the effort's about the same. So those two are relatively the same size. The one in the middle is a bit different because it has more effort, more risk, and more complexity. So the people who sized these stories looked at them and said, well, number one and number three are 5 points, and number 8 is bigger, but not humongously bigger, so that's an 8. So the first mental step in sizing is to look at complexity, risk, and effort. And you're going to look at those in terms of small, medium, large. So if you look at these 4 garages and we think, well, we've got to clean these garages out and make sure all the junk's gone, anything that is supposed to be in the garage has a place and it's in that place, and everything that doesn't belong in the garage is no longer in there, then how complex are these 4 garages to clean out? So you might look at number one and say, wow, that's large, or even extra large complexity. Garage number 2 might be medium or large complexity, depending on how you judged garage number 1 to be. Garage number 3 is probably small, maybe even extra small. And garage number 4 is probably small or medium, depending on how you're looking at them, each other. The amount of risk. So garage number 1 probably has a lot of risk. So maybe that's a large or extra large. Garage number 2 has a pretty good amount of risk there. There's a bunch of stuff just thrown in. It's not all that neat. So that one probably has a medium, maybe large, depending on what you decided garage number 1 was. Garage number 3 has very little risk. So probably extra small or small. And garage number 4 looks like it has very little risk also. So probably extra small or maybe small. And then effort. How much work is there to do? Now keep in mind, this is not how many hours it's going to take, because if we get 10 people to do the work, it might move fast. If we get a bobcat and just throw everything out, that might be really fast. If we go through each and every box one piece at a time and reminisce about the memories attached to all the stuff we find, that might take a really, really long time. So instead of looking at hours, instead look at how much work is there to be done. Garage number 1, a lot of work, large, extra large. Garage number 2, maybe medium. Garage number 1, probably small or even extra small. And garage number two, probably small or extra small. So once you've got an understanding in your head about how much complexity, effort, and risk is involved, and how do they look relative to one another, we're going to go on to step two. And step two is to convert that into t-shirt sizes. So if I've got something that's really, really high in complexity, really, really high in risk, and really high in effort, then that is probably an extra large or a extra, extra large. If I've got something that's small effort, but pretty complex, so maybe a large complexity and a medium risk, then what do you think? Maybe it's a medium, maybe a large. So depending on how you judge the other items in your backlog, you would kind of line those up and what's bigger than the other. So we're looking at t-shirt sizes. You might do extra small, extra, extra small. You might go up to a 5X. That's totally up to your team. We're just trying to understand if I look at it, how big is it from a small, medium, large, and so on perspective, taking into consideration the amount of complexity, effort, and risk. So if we look at these same garages again, that we've already determined complexity, effort, and risk, now we're going to translate those into t-shirt sizes. So maybe garage number one is a extra large. Garage number two is probably large. Garage number one is probably extra small, and garage number four is probably small. Or maybe garage number three is small, and garage number four is medium. It's going to depend on your team what size you choose. And that's okay because we don't compare sizes or points one team to the other. The only thing that story points is used for is for the team to understand how much work it can actually complete in the time box of a sprint. It's not used as a measure of success. It's not used to compare one team to another. And we don't have to be exactly the same on how we determine points between teams, as long as the individuals on the one team are all in agreement. So then step three is to take this t-shirt size and to convert it over to points. To do that, we use the Fibonacci scale or a modified version of the Fibonacci scale. And again, it's up to your team. What is a small? What is a medium? What is a large? Here's some ranges, and you'll see they overlap because I'm not trying to give you exactly what a small is, or an extra small, or an extra large. I want your team to have the power to do that. I'm just giving you some examples of how you might distribute this based on what I generally see others doing. So if you have a 1 point story, maybe it's a extra small. Or maybe, I guess I should say, if you have an extra, extra small t-shirt, then maybe it's a 1 point. If you have a small t-shirt, but it's bigger than the extra, extra small, then maybe it's a 3 or a 5. If you have a medium t-shirt, then it could be a 3 or a 5 or an 8. Maybe you have a few medium t-shirts, but they vary in size. Maybe one's a women's medium and one's a men's medium. So maybe one is a 13 and one is an 8, or one is an 8 and one is a 5. Totally up to you. Same thing with large. So maybe you've got a large t-shirt that if you have a few of them, the large is pretty close to the medium size, but it's still a large, so we're going to name it a 13. And maybe you have extra, extra large, and there are 40. So you want to empower your team to decide what your range is, and as long as you decide together and you agree, then you will always come out with the right sizes. The way most teams use or come up with a size is they play a game called planning poker. Now, to play planning poker, you can have paper cards, decks of cards that are planning poker cards. You can use an online planning poker game if you're a distributed team. Or you can use phone apps where instead of using lifting cards, people just raise their phone and it gives their vote. So a few instructions on planning poker. First, you have enough discussion about the story that you're going to size so that everyone understands what we're trying to get to for the client. So what the user needs, the problem we're trying to solve, and what the acceptance criteria is. They understand the general approach of how we're going to go about this, and they are in agreement to how complex it is, how much effort's there, how much risk is there. Now, they don't necessarily have to have the conversation around how much risk, how much effort, how much complexity is involved for every single story, every single time. When your team gets used to doing this, after a little while, you'll just mentally be able to do those steps. But when you first start, you might have those conversations. Well, how much complexity is in this story? How much risk? How much effort? Okay, so then what t-shirt size do we think this is? A medium? Okay, well, our medium is ranged between 5, 8, and 13. So let's vote. So however you get to the place where you're ready to vote, when it's time to vote, everyone on the team who does the work, so that would be any developers, any testers, any UX people, whoever is involved in actually handling the code to produce working software, they do the voting of the size. The product owner does not participate in the size, and neither does the Scrum Master, though either one might facilitate the process. So everyone looks and selects the size, and someone counts down 3, 2, 1. Then everyone holds up their card or their phone, or they input their items into their online planning poker, and we look around and we see what the general vote is. If most people voted the same, so say in this case, most people voted an 8, there were a couple of 5s, but maybe 5 or 6 8s, then we'd probably go with the 8. If we had 4 people who voted 5 and 4 people who voted 8, they could have some discussion about which way it goes, but usually you just pick the larger number and move on. But if you had 1 or 2 people who voted 2 and others who voted 13, they're a few apart. So you want to let the one with the 13 or the one with the 2 have a little bit of conversation around, well, why did you say that was a 2? That person might have information that others on the team might have. Maybe others think it's way more complex than number 2, than the one with the 2 thinks. So they're able to explain how to do the work easier. And everybody then agrees that, oh yeah, that is smaller. Or the same with the 13. Maybe they've got information that makes the story riskier or more complex than people took into consideration. Once those people have spoken, then you do another vote. You say, again, are we ready to vote? Do we have any questions? All those things. And then someone counts down 3, 2, 1, everybody votes again. And what you're looking for is consensus. So you may not have every single individual on the team agree that this is a 5, but as long as most of them agree and the ones that have a different number consent to, yes, we can go ahead and go forward with a 5, I'll agree to work with that. Then you're good to go. Another reason why you want to have the conversations if there are a few numbers apart in planning poker is because maybe someone doesn't have the right information. Maybe they understood that the work was more complex, but it's really not. Or maybe they're thinking that the work is really simple and they didn't pick up on the information from the rest of the team about the risk or complexity. So the point of this planning poker is that we have the conversations we need to understand how large the work is, what's the size of the work, so that we'll be able to judge accurately how much work we can bring into a sprint when it's time for sprint planning. This is a link to a free online planning poker tool for those of you who are on distributed teams and need to be able to work together. And cards get a little tricky when you're on video. So this is a tool that you might use to play planning poker. Most telephone apps are free if you want to use those if you're local instead of cards. And then most consulting agencies will have planning poker cards, or you can order them off of Amazon, and they're relatively cheap. So back to our step 3. So we decided that this garage number 1 was a large or an extra large. So as a team, maybe we decide this is a 20-point story. Garage number 2, we decided was a medium or a large. So maybe this is an 8-point story or a 13-point story. Garage number 3, we decided was a small or an extra small. So maybe it's a 2. And garage number 4, we decided was a small or a medium. So maybe we call that one a 5 or a 3. It'll be up to your team to decide, and you're empowered to do so. Once you pick a scale, stick to it. So just a quick recap of the 3-step thought process of relative sizing. Step 1, determine complexity, risk, and effort. Step 2, convert those into a single t-shirt size. Step 3, convert the t-shirt size into story points. And remember, as you get started, you probably want to have the conversation around all 3 steps with your team until your team learns to think the same way and they can quickly come to consensus. And after a time or 2, you'll probably be able to just go straight to story pointing because the thought process that's happening in the background will be the same. And remember, you're looking for consensus. Everyone does not have to have a unanimous decision on every item. And if you have to vote more than twice, you probably don't understand enough about that story and may need to do more backlog refinement in order to actually size that story. So thank you for joining today, and I hope this short video is helpful to you in learning how to do planning poker with your team.